On the whole, I would say that all this success nonsense has not really had a grave effect on my life, for the simple reason that I haven't allowed it to. And well, maybe more importantly than that, that none of this happened until I was well into my 30s. My character, for better or worse, was fully formed. One of the problems with success is that you run the risk of believing all the crap that people tell you about how wonderful you are, and gee, Mr. Clancy, you're the best writer in the world right now, which of course is not true. In my case, I was pretty grown up when it happened to me, and the people I feel sorry for, people like, as an example, John McEnroe, who had people telling him that when he was 19 and probably not old enough to have the defenses against hearing nonsense like that. When you're 19 and people tell you things like that, you probably start believing it because you don't know any better. And that can be very, very destructive. When you gamble, you run the chance of losing. That's why it's called gambling. You also run the chance of succeeding, of winning. If there can be, philosophically speaking, there is no success without failure. I mean, if everybody succeeded, we wouldn't have there'd be nothing to measure success against. But if you fail, you learn from what you learn from the experience, you learn what you did wrong, and you do better the next time. Any coach will tell you, you learn more from games you lose than from games you win. And life is so full of opportunities that if you don't reach out and grab at them, then you're just watching life go by. Any serious study of history would conclude that military operations and the way wars are fought and resolved are probably the most important determining factor in human social evolution. That the fact that there is a place called the United States of America results from a war we call the Revolutionary War. The fact that the Jews were not exterminated worldwide results from the fact that in World War II we defeated Adolf Hitler. The fact that we live in a free country today stems from the fact that we were not overturned by communism, and in fact we defeated communism. Therefore, an objective observer would have to say that conflict has essentially shaped the world that we have today, for better or worse. The good news, I think, is that the forces of light ultimately defeat the forces of darkness because the forces of light are ultimately stronger than the forces of darkness. And successful societies tend to be stronger than unsuccessful ones. And the reason the United States essentially defeated the Soviet Union is because freedom and democracy as a political and economic system is much more efficient than a totalitarian system. The only way to avoid risk is not to do anything. And that method of avoiding risk also carries the price that you're avoiding success as well. Now, attempting to succeed necessarily means risking failure. And all too many people do not do that because they're afraid to fail. Well, failure is nothing to be afraid of. Not taking the chance, not trying, not going after your dream, that's something to be afraid of. There's one thing in life that scares the hell out of me, and that's turning 65 and looking in a mirror and telling myself you should have done that when you had the chance, but you didn't have the guts to try. And that's something I'm really afraid of, as a result of which I do lots of foolish things, because probably the only real failure a person can know is the failure to try. Why be afraid of failing? Because even when you fail, you're trying to do something. And the world is full of people who there's a great quote from Teddy Roosevelt. The poor unhappy souls who will know neither victory nor defeat because they never tried. I don't want to be one of those. Initially, the first time you get nasty criticism, and some of the stuff I get has been pretty nasty, but it's true of everyone. It's like having someone tell you that you have an ugly child, because a book is really the child of your mind. And when somebody trashes your book, it's like saying something, that's the ugliest, dumbest, most worthless little girl I've ever seen in my life. Of course, when somebody says that about one of your children, you just want to rearrange his head with give him an Excedrin headache number 357. But first of all, you try to discriminate the legitimate criticism from the illegitimate. And every so often a critic says something intelligent, and you necessarily have to listen to it. It's part of the process. Seeing something that is not yet real and trying to make it real. And that's what we do, and that's what achievement is. It's taking something that isn't there and making it be there. And that's what we do. And that's what we are. And that's how we got here. And as a result of that, we all get together at the, for the award center. We sit around with each other and talk while the kids, the kids are listening to somebody, and we're off, and there's a little knot of us off somewhere talking about stuff. And we have much more fun with each other than the kids do, because of course we also have the advantage of not being intimidated by one another. Which when you're 20 years old, you tend to be intimidated very easily. But there's something not just similar. There's something identical in all of us. We all had an idea, a dream that we wanted to make real, and we all stuck with it till it was. And although we're in all sorts of different fields, I mean, like two of my friends in the academy, Marv Minsky, at head of the artificial intelligence lab at MIT, and Susan Butcher, that crazy gal who takes sled dogs all the way across Alaska. They're both dear friends. That's about as different. I mean, and Tom Clancy, the writer. That's three people about as different as people can be, and yet we're all the same. So, what unifies us is this image that we have of the way we want our lives to be, and the fact that we were unwilling to give up on that dream. I knew the odds were against me. I didn't know how bad the odds were. If I had known how difficult it was, statistically speaking, to get a book published and become a bestseller, I probably wouldn't have tried. But since I was blissfully ignorant of reality, I just never let myself be concerned with that. I never consciously thought about writing a best-selling book. I just wanted to see my name on the cover of a book, and my only objective was to turn out the best possible product I could, and then just to see what happened. And if people liked it, fine, and if not, I would have done that which I wanted to do, and I could get on with my life after fulfilling at least that one dream. You succeed in the world not by wanting to succeed. You succeed in the world by fulfilling a useful objective, by providing people with a product or a service or an idea that they will find useful in one way or another, whether it's entertaining, whether it's something they can use in their day-to-day life. Irrelevant. The only way to acquire wealth and notoriety in any society, certainly the only way to do it legally, is to provide something that people want, even if they don't quite know they want it yet. In the case of Jobs and Wozniak and Apple Computer, the people didn't know they wanted computers until they saw what they could do with them. But really, the only way to succeed in life is to serve others. The only way to get rich in America or any place else in the world, the only way to become famous, the only way to be respected, is to do something that serves other people in one way or another. One of the problems with writing is that what you're writing is about people, and you don't emerge from college with a universal knowledge of human nature. It takes years to acquire. So one of the things I also tell people who want to write is get into a business where you have a lot of contact with people, particularly people of different walks of life. In my case, I was an insurance agent. I had poor clients, I had rich clients, I had in-between clients. Why it took so long is probably a comment on the nature of the writing process, that it requires a lot of intellectual growth before you're ready to write a book that really says something. In other fields, it probably is not all that different, but the applications are somewhat different. If you're in architecture, you have to do a lot of floor plans for a lot of houses. If you want to be an engineer, you have to try a lot of solutions to a lot of different problems before you develop a real talent for it. persistence is probably the most important of the virtues, because unless you stick with something long enough to learn how to do it, you're just not going to accomplish anything. There's a story about Napoleon. He was going over candidates for promotion from general to marshal of France. And somebody was extolling the qualities of one officer or another, and finally Napoleon cut him off and says, yes, yes, I know he's brilliant, but is he lucky? Luck can be a decisive factor. But as Darrell Royals used to say at the University of Texas, luck doesn't go looking for a stumble bum. You have to work for it. And you have to be ready when it arrives. I did all the right things. Maybe not always in the right way, but I did all the right things. Probably the most important message you can pass along is that if you have a dream, do not let go of it. I tell people the most important talent in writing is persistence. That's probably the most important talent in anything, is persistence, sticking with it, seeing it through, not giving up. And if you do that in a society like ours, chances are you're going to succeed. As a practical matter, I think it was Ronald Reagan who made me a national bestseller. President Reagan received the book for Christmas in 1984, The Hunt for Red October. And he read it, and he liked it, and he talked about it a lot. And Time magazine caught wind of the fact that he had this new book that he liked. And so Time magazine did a story about me and the book and the president, and shazam, I was a bestseller. Makes me awfully glad I voted for the man. You know, if you look at the history of various industries or individual companies, it starts off with one or two crazy people with crazy ideas. Apple Computer, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. These guys were totally out of their minds. They decided that ordinary working Americans would like to have personal computers, when any sensible person would have told them you have to be a business or a university to need a personal computer. And in the course of that, these two guys created an industry that now has 20 million personal computers, probably more than that by now, in the United States of America alone. They must have been wacko. But it also turns out they were right. And they tried, and they worked in a garage like good American inventors, and they made something conceptual into something very real and also very, very remunerative. So, yeah, what else is there to say? I got closely involved with a kid who died of cancer on August the 1st of this year. He was 8 years old. And I got to know him about in, March or April of 1990. And he died on August 1st of 1991. We got to be we got to be real close. I mean, he was my friend in a way that's kind of hard to express. I went down to Disney World. When Make-A-Wish sent him to Disney World, I went down for 4 days to be his tour guide. And I saw him in the hospital during the last American Academy meeting in New York. I went over to see him at Sloan Kettering. And I was there when they buried him. I wish I'd gotten involved sooner with kids like that, because although it does hurt a great deal when you lose them, and it was probably the most painful experience of my life, the rewards you get for knowing them and for having fun with them and for trying to brighten their lives is probably the best thing I've ever known in my life. I got to know the kid because he liked one of my books. So if it hadn't been for that, I never would have gotten to know him. What I've learned from that is that there is probably nothing more important in life than your family and your children. And while you may regret many things in life, you will probably not regret spending time with your kids. So one of the reasons I turned down another chance to run for public office, quite simply, is that it would have taken time away from the family. And one of the things I've learned is you don't want to take time away from the family. And you want to be as good a parent to your kids as you can, because you just don't know how long you're going to have them. I wish I'd started writing sooner, but I really don't think I was ready to do it until I actually started doing it. What I would have done differently, in a realistic sense, nothing, because it is impossible to know at 22 the things you know at 44. Life is an evolutionary and an educational process. You grow, you learn and grow and learn and grow. And you can't suppose that it would be possible to know at 25 what you know at 40, because it just takes time to acquire the experience, the information, the knowledge of human behavior that we all acquire as we get older. I mean, the only gratifying thing about getting older is that you do in fact get smarter. Today, for the first time in all of recorded human history, we live in a world without a likelihood of war between major powers. This has never, ever happened in all of human history. Never, ever, no precedent, no guide, no rule book. This is something completely new in the human experience. The greatest challenge in all of human cultural evolution has been to put war behind us, to eliminate war as an instrument of national policy. We are within sight of achieving that goal. Completely unique. That goal will probably be reached by the end of the century, maybe sooner, because the residual regional conflicts in the world historically have been driven for the most part by superpower conflict. And in the absence of superpower conflict, the driving force behind these things has expired. And in due course, the regional wars will stop also. The task for the next century is, how's it go in the Declaration of Independence? To give the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. To make sure that democracy takes root all over the world. And that's really all we have to do. Because once you establish a democratic society, the individual people in the individual nations start acting in their own individual best interest, and in 20 years the country will be reasonably prosperous. And then we can share the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity all over the world. I think our challenges have gotten a lot smaller. The reason for that is that we live in historically unique times. The human condition today is radically different from anything that's existed in all of human history. You can go all the way back to the Trojan War. The Achaean, they weren't even Greek yet, the Achaean city-states duking it out with Troy over, actually what they were fighting about was trading rights through the Hellespont into the Black Sea. It wasn't about Helen and Troy. She was pretty, but she wasn't that pretty. Carry history forward. Egypt fighting the Hittite Empire. Rome fighting Carthage for the 3 Punic Wars. Spain versus England, the Armada. And what that was really about was who was going to run the new world. France and England, what they called the War of the Spanish Succession, what we called the French and Indian War, which was about who was going to own North America. France versus Germany, who was going to be king of the hill in Europe. And the ultimate conflict was, the West team, led by the United States of America, versus the East team, led by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And what that war was about was political control of all of humanity. Who was going to dictate the way people think and vote and act all over the world? Well, the good guys won that one. The forces of democracy won. We have defeated Marxism once and for all. I mean, there's a few remaining infection centers like Cuba and North Korea and South Yemen. Certainly not too many of them left. As I said earlier, the only way to succeed in the world is to do something for others. So you have to take other people into account. Man, we are social animals. We do have social responsibility. But the responsibility is not absolute. I am not. If I build an airplane and somebody drives it into a mountain, and the airplane is not mechanically flawed, it is the responsibility of that person, no matter how many lawyers he hires. Okay. if, if a doctor operates on someone and that person dies, the fact that that person died does not necessarily mean it was the doctor's fault. You know, maybe everybody just had a bad day. Maybe it was an unsavable situation. But we're coming to the point in society where anything other than a perfect outcome is something that you sue about. And the world is not that perfect that the absence of perfection is grounds for legal action. Unfortunately, that's precisely what's happening in society today. You know, the world is not so perfect that everyone will succeed. The world is not so perfect that you can do everything you want without having adverse consequences from it. If you engage in sexual activity, sooner or later a pregnancy is going to result. If you engage in too much sexual activity, a disease is going to result. If you drive a car too fast, sooner or later you're going to rack the car up and be hurt. You know, when you try to absolve people of responsibility, all you end up with is more reckless behavior. And we're seeing too much of that. It's the simple fact that there is no free lunch. And when you make a choice, you have to measure between the chances of a good outcome and a bad outcome. And if the outcome is bad, you learn from it and you go on. If someone protects you from the bad outcome, what have you learned? If you insulate people against failure, nobody will try to succeed. If you continuously give people money for not working, why work? I was at Yale in April talking to the Yale Political Union. And all those people at Yale think they're smart because they go to Yale. Well, I quickly disabused them of that notion. And I can't stand as a snotty kid. Oh, boy. So stomping Yaleys is real fun, you know. Well, you think this college is so great? Hell, you haven't got a single Jesuit on the faculty, you know. But no, there was this one snotty girl in one of the extreme left-wing parties at Yale, and I really stomped on her. And boy, I took such great satisfaction. Not because she was a girl, because she was snotty. I laid a line on her and said, "Okay, answer me," and she didn't have an answer. And you know, I just kept coming back to her. Come on, you got an answer yet? You got an answer yet? She had it coming. Trust me. American social policy in the last 30 years has had genocidal effects on the black population of America. My proof. In 1960, roughly one black child in 5 was born out of wedlock. The rest of them were born into families that had a mom and a dad married, living together. Today, 30 years later, after 25 years of the Great Society, nearly 70% of black children are born out of wedlock. Somewhere along the line, somebody exterminated the black family. So I said, young lady, if this outcome had resulted from something promulgated by the political right, you would call it genocide, wouldn't you? She said she was dumb enough to say yes. Okay, well, the fact that it was done by the political left, does it make it any less true to call it genocide? You can't say that. Wait a minute, genocide? Us? We're the compassionate ones. Well, look at the outcome. That's what welfare has done. It has had the Ku Klux Klan on their best day could not have come up with anything so wonderfully effective at hurting people. And it was done by Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society, and it continues to be promulgated by Ron Dellums and the whole Congressional Black Caucus, and all those kind, gentle, compassionate people. And they've destroyed a subculture, and it's going to take a generation to build it back. I think America has drifted away from some fairly important principles. Today on the American political scene, you have a divergence of opinion that transcends ideology. You know, Hamilton and Jefferson disagreed ideologically on just about everything, but they respected each other and they were good friends. because they shared the same fundamental principles and values. There was a code of conduct back then that everyone adhered to. And unfortunately, I think we're getting away from that. That there are political elements in American society that apply one standard of behavior to white males, and another standard of behavior to black women, and another standard of behavior to any other group you care to name. And that's not right. I think we should apply the same standards of behavior and the same standards of responsibility to every individual, regardless of age, sex, race, or anything else. And we've gotten away from that. And that will ultimately be harmful to our society. We've gotten away from the idea that people are responsible for their actions. And what responsibility means is if you screw up, you pay the price for screwing up. We are trying to make America into a risk-free society. Well, the Marxists tried that, and it didn't work. You can't live life without taking risks. When you get into a car, you take a risk. When you step into the shower, you take a risk. When you go to a baseball game, you take a risk. Trying to eliminate those risks, in addition to taking much of the spice out of life, takes a lot of the innovation out of people. If you penalize people for having good ideas that may not quite be perfect, then you're taking away the incentive for people to have new ideas that improve life. It actually worked better than I predicted it would. I had quite a few reporters call me and, gee, Mr. Clancy, you were right, it all works. So, of course it works. Yeah. This is all hardware that I've used. I mean, these are all weapon systems and equipment that I've played with. I mean, I've driven tanks in the desert. I fired the M1 tank and driven it around and done all that stuff. Of course it works. Yeah, I wouldn't if I didn't think it worked, I wouldn't have put it in my books that way. And of course, quite a few critics clobbered me for having the audacity to say that I was right and all these defense experts were wrong. Well, I say with all due smugness that I was vindicated by that. More importantly, much more importantly, I think, the kids we had out there working the equipment were every bit as good as I said they were. The people we have out there wearing our country's uniform are the very, very best our country turns out. And it was about time, I thought, that those kids were recognized for their talent, for their intelligence, for their devotion, for their dedication, and above all, for their professionalism. Technology is just another word for tool. There was a time when a nail was high-tech. Chicago was the first city built with nails. Before then, wooden houses were done with mortise and tenon. There was a profession called joiners who put beams together and stuff. And buildings and wall panels and stuff were put on with little wooden pegs. Well, then somebody came up with the idea of making nails out of steel wire. And the first houses built of those were called balloon frame houses, and Chicago was the first city built of balloon frame houses. So, 120 years ago, a nail was high tech. All right. Well, we don't think of a nail as being very high tech today. We don't think of the automobile as being terribly high tech today. We don't think of the TV as being terribly high tech today. And yet, within living memory, both were. So, technology is just another word for tool. And what it tells us about society is the better your tools, the more things you can do. We live today in times which are better in any measurable context, better than any period in all of human history. And technology is what allows us to live the lives that we live. When I screw up big league, okay? So what? I'm not afraid to appear foolish once in a while. It's not going to diminish the person that I am. Yeah, as I said, the only thing I'm afraid of is not trying. And if it means looking dumb once in a while, so what? The people who are most of the people who tell me how stupid I am are people who've never had the guts to try anyway. People who achieve do not criticize other people who achieve. People who try don't criticize those who try and fail. We try to help them. Say, hey, You gave that one a nice shot, but you made a couple mistakes, and I don't know all of them, but this is one mistake, and I hope you learn from it. And we try to help each other along. The writing business, it's a very friendly union. One of the nice things about becoming a writer is that you get to meet all your heroes. In my case, I know Freddie Forsyth, I know Jack Higgins, I know Jerry Pournelle and Larry Niven and John Varley and A.J. Quinnell and John Keegan and Bob Woodward and a whole bunch of others. And although people think that we're competitors, actually we're not. We all get along very, very well, and we all admire each other, and both for the same reason and for different reasons. People who achieve do not ridicule other people who try. The people who do ridicule are critics. And of course, critics are people who wish they could do something and can't, and hate those who can. It's just a form of envy in many cases. The basic strength of any society, in military terms, stems from the country's economy. The better the economy, the more things it can turn out, the better are the things it can turn out. The strength of an economy comes from the individual minds of the citizens of that country. What we have demonstrated in the last 200 years in America is if you maximize the freedom for each individual mind, you maximize the choices a person can make, you maximize the reward a person gets for coming up and implementing a good idea, the stronger the economy becomes. I mean, really, the whole thing begins with a free individual making a free choice to live his or her life in whichever way the person chooses to live it. Everything else grows out of that. So an economy was brought down because the communist system of political government is so grossly inefficient that it just can't do anything right. I mean, the Soviet Union cannot feed itself, even though it has enormous resources, more resources, in fact, than the United States of America. What the Soviets proved in the last 70 years was that freedom works better than anything else. And just about everything else has, in fact, been tried. And the system of government and the philosophical beliefs we hold in America are simply the valid ones, and communism, Marxism-Leninism is invalid. Back in 1986, when I went to England for the first time, the Research Patriot Games, I had breakfast with Jack Higgins. His real name's Harry Patterson. He was an instructor in literature at Oxford University, and he's a heck of a nice guy, a very smart guy. And he liked Red October, and so he wanted to meet me and have breakfast. And we had the same publisher in England. So in the course of breakfast, he said, kid, so I had one book under my belt then. He was the old pro telling the youngster how to do things. So I'm going to tell you something, kid. Something happened to me, and I hope you learn from it, because it's sure as hell going to happen to you. So he was walking down either Piccadilly or the Strand, a fashionable street in London. And this elderly lady bumps up to him and says, "You're Jack Higgins." "Yes, ma'am." "You saved my life." "Excuse me?" And then the lady explained that she had been in the hospital. She had cancer. She was in for a major surgical procedure. She was, of course, not feeling terribly well. She was quite depressed, contemplating death. And one of the nurses or a social worker, someone in the hospital gave her a book to read, and it was one of Jack's books, Harry's books. And she liked it, and she read another one, and another one, and another one. And reading those books allowed her to escape from where she was and to think about things other than her own misery. And as a result of that, she said that she survived something she otherwise would not have survived. And Jack says, I just didn't know what the hell I was supposed to say to her, except I'm glad that I was of service to you. And Tom, it's going to happen to you, and you'd better think about it ahead of time. You better know what to say. Well, he was right. I've gotten letters like that. I've had people come up to me and tell me that. And that is what convinces me that I'm in an honorable profession that does useful things. Fundamentally, I'm in the entertainment business. My function in life, for the most part, is to take people out of their lives and put them somewhere else. People who drive trucks or sell real estate or transplant hearts or practice law or do accounting or any profession you care to name. My function is to take them out of their lives and put them somewhere else where they can vicariously experience another life. Along the way, I try to educate, I try to enlighten, I try to tell people about things they don't know about and do so in a factual and realistic way. That's an honorable tradition. William Shakespeare did it, a whole lot of people did it. And I'm quite comfortable with that. Along the way, I've done a little educating. Maybe I've helped people think a little bit more deeply about certain important issues. President Bush was once kind enough to say I've had a positive effect on U.S. national security. That aside, the fact that I entertain and enlighten a few people is sufficient to the moment. You got to believe in what you're doing. The people I write about, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, cops, special agents of the FBI, field officers for CIA, are very often people who are in the business of risking their lives for other people whom they do not know. And the fact of the matter is that a person does not risk his life very often for things in which he or she does not believe. You do not risk death for money very often. You do not risk death for things in which you do not believe very often. The reason you put it on the line is because you think you're making the world a better place for having done so. Probably the most useful people in the world are the romantics, the people with the mindset of a poet, who see the world the way they wish it to be and try to make it so. If you examine people who have the Medal of Honor, you will find very often that what drove them was not courage as we understand it, but rage. They simply would not accept things as they were and did everything in their power to change it. Probably the people I most admire in the world are the docs and the nurses who take care of critically ill children. That probably requires more courage than anything I have ever encountered. I know I have had the privilege of meeting 7 people with a Medal of Honor, and they're some pretty special fellows. But not one of them did something that required more than a few hours of great, courageous effort. I know docs who've been treating critically ill children for 20 years. And they're not just risking their lives, they're risking their souls. They're risking their faith in God, their sanity to do what they do. And yet they press on because they have a very precise sense of mission. Their mission is to keep children alive. And they enter into this employment in the knowledge that very often they will fail, despite which they press on. That's passion. That's believing in what you're doing. That's knowing that what you're doing is important. That even if you just saved the life of one child, you've done something worth doing. Maybe the best scene I ever wrote is in Patriot Games, where Jack Ryan's daughter is in the hospital, and she's been seriously injured in a murder attempt. And Jack is downstairs waiting to see if she's going to survive or not. So the scene shifts to the doc, and he gets the printout from the blood gas analyzer, checking on liver function to see if her liver is going to survive the trauma or not. And he hands the printout to the nurse practitioner and says, you want to go tell the family. The doc walks out of the critical care recovery unit to the stairwell, trudges up the stairs to the roof of the shock trauma building in Baltimore. And he pulls out a cigarette and lights it. And he looks north, and north of that hospital in Baltimore is the home of Edgar Allan Poe. And it turns out that this doctor is a tiny bit crazy. He is in a high-stress profession where he deals with trauma patients on a daily basis. And he has this little mental game he plays with himself, that his enemy is embodied by Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote principally about untimely death and just about everything he put on paper. And so he looks at the house where Poe lived, and down at the street where Poe, where he collapsed drunk in a gutter and ultimately caught pneumonia, from which he died. And he looks at the house and he says, "You son of a bitch. You don't get this one. This one goes home." Flips away the cigarette, goes back downstairs to get some sleep. I've had more people call me, particularly doctors, to tell me they cry when they read that, which is about the best compliment that anybody can give you. Because it is a fight between good and evil, and I'm just one of the people who happens to believe that good ultimately wins, because good is ultimately stronger. And if that were not true, how come we're not living in caves?